What's up, boys, and welcome back to another video. Today, the topic is nuclear revenge again, because you guys seem to like that. So, yeah, I hope you enjoy, and let's get into the first Reddit post. r/nuclear revenge by user adorable jokes 6324. Want to promote friends family instead of knowledgeable current employees. Okay then, I'll shut down your facility, is the title. I thought about this one for a while before posting it, trying to decide if I wanted to, and if so, where should it go. Finally, after looking at how it all played out, it clearly belongs here. Sit back, as this is going to take a bit to lead into everything and why it happened. Just to set up some background. I was working for a privately run correctional facility, PCF for short, and had been doing this so for nearly 10 years now. Names will be omitted for anonymity reasons, even though the facility is now since closed down. The pay is nothing like what state or federal employees get paid, and it was a constant show of being shorthanded. Consistent show of being shorthanded. I worked my way through the ranks, from being a frontline officer in the units to visitation sergeant to shift commander, finally security specialist. Bear with me, as it does take a bit to explain why the upward steps came. When I was on the floor officer, I worked with others assigned to the same unit to get general code conduct going, i.e. we would expect out of the officers, and what we would let slide within reason. Because of this unit, we worked on and ran so well that most of us thought the unit as the easiest unit in the facility to work. But it was all because of us. Ran it nearly identical and were consistent and fair. Eventually, this caused my shift commander to move to the other areas as a test, eventually into a visitation. Visitation ended up being one of my most demanding positions. I worked at the facility simply because prior officers had done so little and were so behind. Along with my partner, which regularly changed because of the stress of the position. We got visitation department up to code and went from taking 5 visitors a week to over 80 visitors a weekend on the regular. After doing this for roughly 3 years, I moved to Sergeant of Visitation, which was less stressful and it was more supervisory and handling complaints as well as necessary policy revisions. After nearly 2 years, I moved into Shift Commander. Here, identified several issues with overtime policies to include significant favoritism issues, as well as corrected several reporting flaws that were where consistently being dinged by PPMU, Private Prison Monitoring Unit of the Department of Corrections in my state. Because of this, PPMU personnel and I became very close, and as I worked with them on clarifying and correcting some of these things we weren't doing quite right. This led to creating several spreadsheets in Excel that more or less made tracking overtime, vacations, assignments, and various other things little managerial things for easier to track, with barely anyone having to do much other than add their employees and fill out assignments for each shift. This allowed us to get from favoritism and more easily spread the copious amounts of overtime fairly, so everyone was doing their fair share, instead of just handful consistently being able to take advantage of while also making it easier to explain monthly shortages. Higher ups loved it, PPMU loved it, and many of the overworked frontline staff were delighted by it because it allowed them to finally get some rest after 16-hour shifts, while others hated it because they couldn't go skate by under the radar without doing a share of mandatory overtime. Part of a new hire requirement was signing you understood that there was mandatory overtime, and refusal could lead to disciplinary up to termination. During this time, we had some changes in administration and the creation of a couple of positions that were required as part of our contract with the state, which was renegotiated yearly. This is important to know later on. This includes at least one captain per shift. Originally, we had 2 lieutenants, a captain of housing, had none prior, a security specialist, also the LT position, changing several positions from officer to sergeant level. This is where the problem started, and a number of staff started filing complaints because the state mandated these positions. Private company didn't like it, cutting into their profit margins, and begrudgingly agreed. However, our administration saw this as a way to get their friends in cushy positions. Company policies says to promote from within, but our administration found ways to make it seem like most internal candidates didn't meet the qualifications, while hiring old buddies into newly created captain and administrative positions. I was eventually moved to security specialist and backup shift commander. My new role was creating facility specifications, specific admins, and administrations to regulations to ensure we were following the purpose of administration regulations. This entailed how our equipment was managed, key setup permissions, restrictive housing unit, visitation, perimeter security, and making sure all guests, visitors, vendors, volunteers, entry policies were followed, and to include mandatory background checks. I also ended up taking over several other Excel spreadsheets that were required to show each other the department in the facility was accordingly staffed and required hours per state contract agreement. I was quite the handful, to say the least, and by closer following the administration regulations. I was quickly making more enemies, as a lot of issues started showing up how incompetent this administration was. Namely, the major housing captain and one of the captains that were buddies with the major got hired. As security specialist, I reported directly to the major, deputy warden, and the warden, as well as, by extension, PPMU. We had regular meetings to discuss issues and how to and it was my job to author the adjustments so the major could review and sign them along with Warden because they went into effect. Before they went into effect. By this time, I was a sole manager of no less than 5 major Excel spreadsheets in the facility used in various departments, all of which trained each other in those departments. To include major and captains, it was eventually becoming their responsibility to manage them. This included giving them encrypted passwords if those spreadsheets ever broke corrupted as Excel. I know to do it on the occasion. However, this didn't happen, and I was consistently the go-to in order to get them fixed. After a couple of years, this in comes to the private corp to renegotiate the contract, and suddenly my position responsibilities get recognized as the respective captain or major's responsibility. At this time, a new captain position comes up, and I put in for it along with several others with similar experience, and one that has absolute bare minimum experience, but is close friends with the major, and another administration sitting on the higher up board. Needless to say, they get the position, and I got bumped down to my old position as housing LT. I asked my major why I can't be moved back to shift manager, or shift commander, where I can at least work on all the policies and sheets I've made up to this point, which my major says to me, "You aren't captain, and we need a captain there, not you. Just happy you didn't get demoted and stop trying to be a captain." I smile and reply, "Okay. But you do know, if you move me to housing, I am no longer have the responsibilities over all the work I am currently doing, as this is all security related responsibilities, and housing has different entities from one another. Security had final say over housing, but it was housing's responsibility to address housing issues before coming to security. This meant moving me to housing LT instead of back to shift commander would mean I no longer had any right to correct them when they didn't follow this policy I had written prior, and certainly meant I had no responsibility over any of the spreadsheets they managed. "Well, that is how it works here," the major replied. "You did get the captain position. I'm sure we can choose the best person, and there will be no issues. Just do what your new position is because you aren't a captain, you are a housing LT. And you will do what is part of that position." At this point, he gives me the biggest poo-eating grin as he has waited 3 years to put me in my place for making his job as hard by actually having to do his job. "Okay," I say, and leave the room without saying anything further. Cue the nuclear revenge. Now I had submitted complaints of harassment and policy violations with updates as further incidents took place, causing the complaint to perpetually open, and this was added to the complaint with the document. This was another notch to long-going issues on that various others I had worked with also joined in, as they equally been railroaded, harassed, discriminated against, to include lost wages, and saw nepotism taking place. It is important to know that the policy on nepotism nepotism for the company included language that started family and close friends could not have unfair advantages in promotion or job replacement over qualified or current employees. Now it isn't immediate, this change, but after a couple of months I'm now working as housing LT and taking care of my new responsibilities. I've shed all responsibilities of prior spreadsheets, policies, adjustments, and anything that doesn't have to do with my immediate department. It is about this time when things start to go noticeably wrong. Even though I took the train, assign management rights, and give password control of all workbooks to the responsible department heads, most of which was the major. It didn't take long for it all to go to crap. The new captain doesn't know anything about Excel. Who doesn't know anything about Excel? I guess this was a while ago. Let alone anything of the reporting software a shift commander has to use, sometimes multiple times a day, is very lacking in the knowledge of AR, and quickly gets various offender and staff complaints. The major isn't keeping track of spreadsheets he is supposed to manage, contract compliance tracking, and facility entry tracking, because he is just as clueless as when it comes to completing anything computer related. And visitation is slowly going down the drain, because nothing of the other captain kept open communication with the sergeant or officers to help him deal with the issues and staffing concerns. By this point, PPMU is very unhappy and demanding that these areas be brought up to compliance within 30 days, or they will have to pursue fines against the company, cutting further into the monthly profit margin by nearly $1,000 per day of compliance for each issue, on top of other fines or for failure to fill contract obligation positions. Needless to say, these are fines that added up very fast for those who don't know. Yeah, that's gotta be a lot of money for fines. At this point, my housing captain calls me into his office with another one of the admins to give me an assignment of fixing these troubled areas. After reviewing the assignment, I smile back and tell him, "Sorry, Major. Told me I wasn't captain and that I was going to stop doing captain work now that I was housing LT. This is beyond my assignment. Post to fix it as a requirement. It requires me to tell security what to do in order to fix it. We should work as a team. You don't want a team to suffer, do you?" he says to me. Then you should. Then admin pipes in. "LT, let me get this right. You're refusing to do this because you didn't get the captain position." I then give him the same poo-eating grin the major gave me and told me months earlier. "Well, that's how it works here, isn't it? Security manages security, and housing takes care of housing unless it's jeopardized the security of the facility. Then it is a security problem, right?" I roll my shoulders into a shrug. I simply lack the authority to do the job, and the major assured me that you and the other captains had it all under control. I shouted it all to you before I was reassigned, remember? By this point, I can see the captain is getting visibly upset, as they are now entirely responsible for all the work I used to do. The other admin at this point looks at me and asks, "So you're refusing to do the assignment?" It isn't that I'm refusing to do the assignment, It is just that with all my new responsibilities as housing LT, I simply do not have the time to do them, and the work of a captain, which the major made very clear I am not supposed to do to do the work anymore of any longer as I'm not a captain. I then stand with a smile and say, so no, I am not refusing the assignment. I am following the orders of a higher up superior that told me not to. Not to no longer do anything outside of my assignment duties as housing LT. Last I checked, the position I had signed stated as only to do assignments that are housing unit responsibilities, which I also signed by the major and the warden. And if you don't mind, I really have the other responsibilities I need to get to, getting vacation requests back to them. I then smile to them and both walk out of the office as I currently am in the middle of getting vacation requests and working on offender housing assignments to ensure we were in compliance with SGG, Security Threat Group, and racial balance requirements for nearly 1,000 offenders in the facility. About 20 days later, I receive a phone call on vacation for 8 a.m. From the stand-in warden. Our warden had been on administrative leave pending the investigation, along with said housing captain. Is this LT? Asked the stand-in warden, to which I said groggily, yes. Who is this? This is the stand-in warden. I am sitting in the room with housing captain who has brought something rather startling to my attention. He says that you refused to do an assignment that resulted the inability to track various things in the facility. Is that correct? At this point, I'm sitting up in my bed. Yes, that is correct. But that is because I didn't even get to finish, as the stand-in warden, clearly upset at my admission, and interrupts me. You do realize that this is insubordinate behavior that is gross in nature, don't you? Anger clearly in his voice, but controlled anger. I can imagine that the housing captain is sitting in the room with a poo-eating grin in his face. Am I going to get an answer, or are you going to interrupt me again? It seems you have already made up your mind on what matter. Given your tone of your voice, I respond, sir. You are correct. I have decided that your negligence in performing duties as assigned is gross in nature and believe it meets requirements for parameters for immediate termination effect immediately. He pipes back, obviously not happy with what I said. You do realize I will be adding this to my complaint of workplace harassment and retaliation if you do so, without getting the full story, don't you? This means that I will be adding your name to the complaint for failure to do due diligence in getting the full story on top of the warden you are currently replacing, the housing captain sitting in with you, the major, and several others for violation of your own disciplinary policy. I am shaking at this point with anger. That this is happening, and I have to restore this extent to get my point across. And yes, I do have access to all the documents, including all the current policies of the company and current contract between the company and the state, and I will pursue you if this continues. You do what you feel is necessary. I am doing what I feel is necessary. As to this date, you are hereby terminated. You receive in the mail your disciplinary form and decision to include the formal answer to your complaint by this week's end. You see, if you're part of the complaint, you are no longer can issue a formal answer according to the policy. It will now have to come from corporate HR, who will have to agree with your decision and already has a copy of the complaint as well. Well then, you'll be hearing from them, I suppose. Then the phone hangs up, but not before I could hear the change in his voice, the tone of his voice as well. I wasted little time in updating my complaint and notifying the corporate HR person I'd been in contact with for 6 months now. The aftermath. A week later, a notice was sent out to all employees that the facility will be closing their doors permanently in 90 days. I continued to receive my full 40-hour-a-week pay until those doors closed without having to return to work. I was then later allowed to file for unemployment, and as well as the technical reason for lost employment was through no fault of my own. I later found out from the HR department that the facility was closed due to 4 major reasons. 1. The company was no longer making any profit due to poor management decisions that led to PPMU ensuing upwards of $75,000 in fines per month, on top of out-of-control overtime due to shift commanders not properly tracking their shifts, officer overtime, vacation, or off days. 2. Many of the administration and captains had received numerous complaints of company violations to include harassment and nepotism. 3. PPMU investigated the qualifications of some of the recently hired and promoted administrations and captains, as they too were suspicious that they didn't meet prior qualifications for the position. This means that they were entitled to a back fine of all the days those positions were filled because simply they were unqualified candidates. The investigation found all the complaints. 4. The investigation found all the complaints to be valid and would require termination of nearly all the administration, 2 captains, and 1 HR for failure to correct the issues, meaning it was easier to cut their losses rather than trying to fix it. Why was this nuclear revenge? Well, the state had quickly moved and relocated nearly 1,000 offenders, 250 people that lost their jobs, of which 15 of them ended up fired due to policy violations, resulting in the investigation of nepotism and workplace harassment. A few had workplace discrimination and resulted in one person who was receiving not receiving fair wages, of others filing complaints for similar reasons of others similar positions to receive backup pay of upwards of $38,000. My start of complaints led to others filing complaints for similar reasons in nearly 2 years leading up to this, adding to the documentation of the issues that resulted in the closure of the facility. Even knowing the impact this had, if I were to live through it again, I still would have done the same thing. Wow, P. That's insane that they would even have that audacity to even try that. Like, the captain and the majors, or the major and the captains, are crazy. Because if anyone did that in any other workplace, and if they were any lower, they would have been fired immediately because, Jesus, that's just bad. But anyway, thank y'all for watching. I hope y'all have a good day. Peace.